is Copic Maker, and today we're going to be working on some rusty skills of mine. You see, when I was in college, I was a drawing, painting, and printmaking major and spent a lot of time drawing figures, making master copies, drawing still lifes, and painting faces. But since college, I have comfortably fallen back into my love, which is cartoon and anime style drawings. But I also really loved drawing figures and portraits and have recently found myself itching to practice some drawings. So I wandered over to Pinterest to find some interesting portraits where I could get my feet wet. For this video, I decided that I was going to make 2 portraits completely with Copic markers. Typically, I would paint with watercolors, sometimes add some details with Copics, and then add little details in with colored pencil, but I wanted to see if it was possible for me to create a full portrait completely using Copic markers. When looking for reference on Pinterest, I wanted to find 2 portraits that were very different from each other. So I literally searched portrait reference. There were some really cool portraits that I definitely wanted to try drawing. I'm a sucker for dramatic lighting. But I eventually stumbled across this photo and loved the colors. It had the deep dark lighting I wanted, but also had some really interesting colors. This was the second photo I found that I liked, and it was completely different from the first one. No dramatic lighting and a much brighter color scheme, and this time it was a girl. I thought they were different enough to give them a shot, so I grabbed my little Copic book of colors, picked the colors I thought I needed, and got started. But wait a minute, does Copic Maker, don't these pictures belong to someone else, and isn't this stealing? Yes. So let's talk about it. Now, let me just start by saying that this is just my opinion. A lot of different artists and people have different opinions about reference and quote-unquote stealing, so the words that are gonna come flying out of my mouth are just that, opinion. Now, at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I wanted to practice drawing faces, and thus I went searching for reference. I had intentions to use these photos for my own personal growth as I brush up on drawing portraits and coloring them. In no way am I going to start selling prints of these and calling them my work. These drawings are clearly working off of these photographs. I learned a lot from working on them, and I am very grateful to them. When working using reference, it is super important to credit the artist as best you can, especially if you have intentions to post them on social media. In fact, the first drawing we worked on today was a photograph taken by Lendro Crespi. I believe that's how you say it. Once finding the photograph, I went to his website and Instagram to make sure that the picture I was using was definitely his work. His photos are super awesome. I'll make sure to leave a link to his stuff in the description. But the second photograph, I really tried, you guys. When I clicked the link leading from Pinterest, it brought me to a wig website, when clearly I don't think this photograph was originally taken for wigs. So I couldn't find the photographer who took this photo, but if anyone knows, please tell me and I will make sure to add it in the description. Typically, if you find stuff like this, if you're really just working for yourself, if you're working in your sketchbook, it's okay, like I said, as long as you're not posting it online, saying that it's your work. But for the sake of this, I probably should have ended up going with reference where I could actually show you guys the artist, but stuff like this happens sometimes. Luckily, as stated, this is really, as I said, just for practice for me, and I am not selling this work at all. When I was in college, we did this a lot. We would literally take paintings created by masters and recreate them to have a better understanding of their process and practice our skills. I honestly believe that photo reference is the same thing. As long as you can credit the artist, say it is not your idea or original work, and that you were working strictly for educational purposes, then I think it's okay. But what do you guys think? Do you think it's okay to work from reference this way as long as you're crediting and stating that it's practice? I am very curious to see what your thoughts are on this. Now let's get back to the art. As we wrap up this first one, our dark blue and pink boy, I have to say, I love and hate this portrait. I have never tried to create a portrait with these colors before, and it was honestly really difficult to do with the current Copic markers that I have. In person, the bright pinks I use stand out a lot. But for some reason, through photos and with the scanner, it just didn't seem to compare. And even messing with the colors on my computer, I couldn't seem to bring back what it actually looks like. Also, having not done a more realistic portrait in a long time, the angle of his face is totally off. In fact, even though it pains me to do this, let's take a look at them side by side. When drawing the angle of the face, I really thought I had drawn his eyes at more of a diagonal line, but that's why it's so important to really have a solid drawing when working with traditional mediums. I know I've given the excuse before that when I'm drawing I have things propped up and I'm kind of drawing at an angle, so the perspective's kind of wonky, but there are tips and tricks that you can do to try to prevent this. You can take a photo of your drawing and you can hold it upwards to look at it, and I was really just so kind of into the moment working on it that I didn't do those things, but it's really important to try to catch yourself on that and even compare it as often as you can to the photograph, which I thought I was doing, but it really ended up kind of turning out different in the end, so there's that. But the reason why it's so important to have a really solid drawing is because, unfortunately, with traditional mediums, there is no erase, cover up, or Control Z that can help you when you make really, really big mistakes. I also believe that the colors I used didn't quite work when it comes to the shadows on the face. In the original photograph, there's this deep dark blue that creates the shadow and actually blends straight into the background. I picked what I believe to be the closest blue I could find for the shadow, but with how I rendered the face, the blue just wasn't believable, especially with how I tried to blend the color into the background. In the end, I decided to try to separate the face from the background, but even then the blue just was too thin and light, so I continued to darken it and then darkened it even more off camera after I finished it to try to make the face look more complete. Overall, I think the face, it's okay, just not comparing it to the angle of the original. I like looking at the pink area, especially close up, but there are definitely some adjustments that need to be made. Regardless, I am still grateful for the experience that I got from it. And here are the colors that I used for this piece. The second drawing was actually a little more difficult for me starting off. What I typically do when drawing a portrait is start off by kind of mapping out the negative space by looking at where the whole head lines up in the frame of the paper. I then get kind of a rough sketch of the head, and then I actually work on all of the shadow areas, figuring out and circling all the highlights and shadows in my reference. The last drawing was perfect for that because there were so many great light and dark spots that I could separate in the face. With this reference image, it turned out to be a little bit more difficult because there is so much light on the face and a lot less shadow. The shadows on the girl's face are a lot more subtle, so I knew I would have to start coloring by working really, really light first. For those of you who've used markers or watercolors, you know that this medium is different than using paints like acrylic or oil. Now, there are ways to use acrylics and oils to build up the colors in sort of a similar fashion, but with oil and acrylic, you can typically paint over and add darks on top of lights and lights on top of darks and kind of work in any direction. But with Copics and watercolors, you really have to start with your lightest values and build up your dark slowly. So really, if you lay down colors that are too dark too quickly, there kind of isn't any going back, especially with markers. Once you lay down a Copic, that's kind of it. You might be able to lighten it with a colorless blender, but for the most part, finito. So for this portrait, I tried to lay down the lightest skin tones I could for her, and then started on putting the lightest colors down for her hair as well. I honestly thought I would be spending less time on this portrait than the first one because there were less layers I needed to do to make things darker and more dramatic, but this one probably took me about just as long because of the hair. My god, I forgot how much time it takes for you to painstakingly do strands of hair, or even grouping chunks of waves together can be tiresome. This is usually where I go through and add lots of details with the colored pencil because I love getting into all those little strands and spinning forever on them, but like I said, I really wanted to try to do this with Copics only. think I got a little lost in the hair after a while, but once I started getting in there with darker and darker colors, it started to come together. Now, let's take a look at it next to the reference image. Not too bad. There's still some things that need to be tweaked, such as the eyes and eyebrow not being in quite the right place and being a smidge too big. I also know I spent a while trying to get her jaw and cheek right, so it still looks a little off to me. Her hair isn't 100% there either, but I think I at least rendered it as believable as I could with markers. Woo, man was this fun. I remember in college, some of my favorite quiet moments were sitting in front of a canvas, just picking away at details in the hair and face of the portraits I would work on. I honestly sat for hours working on these portraits for this video and had some chill hop music on. It was probably the most relaxed I felt in a long time. I eventually want to try some more portraits again, preferably ones from photos I've taken myself or with people I know. It's fun to work on cool dynamic pieces from neat photos, but there's also something really special about working on personal portraits. I really enjoyed the process of working on this, and I hope you enjoyed watching me work today. I'll leave links for the credited artists below, and if I find the photographer who took the second picture, I will definitely include it as well. Here are the colors I used for the second drawing. The last time I did a portrait in watercolors was my Mary Poppins painting. I'll leave an iCard right here if you would like to check that out as well. I would honestly love to have a conversation with you all about traditional versus digital mediums as well, because as you can see, I kind of flip-flop back and forth a bit with these mediums on this channel, so let me know if that's something you would like to hear me talk about. But that's it for me this week. I hope you enjoyed watching me color two very different portraits using only Copic markers. It was a challenge, but a super fun one. If there was something about these portraits that you would like to ask me about, don't be afraid to leave me a comment, or you can send me a message on any of my social media. Videos like this are possible because of my amazing patrons, so thank you all so very much for your support. I appreciate you all stopping by, and I hope that we can draw together again soon. Bye guys.